Okay, so we'll start a new packet today. Let's see here. Hilchos Tzedakah 7. Yeah, I think we'll just start a new tshuva today also. Okay, let me share my screen. The last tshuva that we saw was also dealing with the subject of getting benefit from tzedakah money. Just see. Okay, so the last tshuva we saw, just so that we should get our bearings, was Hayimuter Liknos Kartis Hagrala Mikaspe Maaser. Is it permitted to purchase a lottery ticket from your Meiser money? And his conclusion was, as long as your objective is for the mitzvah of tzedakah, and the tzedakah is going to the poor. However, he said, Ulam im zacha bekartis be'eze pras, if you do end up winning the lottery and you get a prize as a result of playing the lottery. So he said, either the prize is a gift from the Mossad, and therefore you're not obligated to do anything to give it back to the institution. O shehu shayach lemaaser mishum shehu ke'ein mechirat tmurat hamaaser shekibel hamosad v'hamosad yachol likvo im ze begeder matana o begeder mechira, or it's almost like an exchange that you're making with the Mossad. And if it's considered to be like an exchange, it would be subject to additional meiser. I think that was what the ramification that we were dealing with. So he revisits this question of buying a lottery ticket. Misha kone kartis hagrala mikaspo. If a person does buy a lottery ticket, imutar lo lasos tanaish im lo yizke yachula mafreya al kaspo din meiser ksafim. Is he allowed to say that that if I don't win the lottery, then I want this yachula mafreya al kaspo din meiser ksafim. Then I want this retroactively to be considered charity. In other words, I guess what he's saying is as follows. He's really playing the lottery in order to win. Apparently, some charitable institution is selling lottery tickets, or maybe it's going to, let's say, some government institution that needs it for helping some social welfare program. And so he's buying a lottery ticket, but he's really doing it in the hopes to win. But he says, but if I don't win, then I want it to count as meiser retroactively. So in that situation, he says, asur. He says, you're not supposed to do that. That's not okay. Ulam lanias daiti mutar liknos kartis hagrala b'chek dachoy sheta'aricho hu la'achar hahagrala. What you could do is buy a lottery ticket with a post-dated check, where the check will only be cashed after the date of the drawing. Diyatneh shebishata tashlum Harosham b'check yikva mimahu mishalem o mima'osov o mimos meiser. And then you could make some kind of condition or stipulation that once the check date arrives, because it's really only a promissory note, this check, you'll decide from which funds it'll be drawn from, whether it'll be drawn from your regular funds or from your Meiser funds. Now, what he's trying to suggest is that you only want this to count as charity if you don't win. But if you do win, I guess what's the benefit of having it not count as charity if you do win? Is that because it belongs to the charity? I guess really, we really have to go back to the previous discussion. We really didn't exhaust this. Let's take a look at the previous tshuva again. Are you allowed to buy a lottery ticket from Meiser money? So he says, Mutter liknos kartis hagrala mikaspei maaser keshamitkavein lemitzvas tzedakah. You are permitted to buy a lottery ticket from your Meiser money when your objective is primarily for charity. And when the proceeds are going to support the poor. Okay, so we read this already, right? It's you if you do end up winning, either it's considered to be a gift from the charity or it's considered to be an exchange for your money. What's the nafkamina? So let's take a look. So he says, B'shulchan Aruch kosav v'zelushono. Ha'omer sela zu l'tzedakah v'ifrisho. If a person says, this coin in my hand is going to tzedakah, you put it aside in a separate place in your home. Ad shelo ba liyad hagabay yochol l'shanosa. So until it gets into the hands of the gabay tzedakah, you can change which charity you wish to give it to. And you can even use it for personal use. You could even borrow the money yourself, almost like taking a loan from the money that you set aside for charity. You could lend it out to other people, and you could pay back different money as long as you make up the amount that you pledged for tzedakah. But mishabal gabai asur lil voto. But once it comes into the hands of the gabbai tzedakah, you're not allowed to borrow the money from the gabbai anymore. In other words, you can't go to a gabbai tzedakah and say, "May I borrow some of the tzedakah that I gave you?" Bein lo, bein la acher, bein la gabbai ad kan l'shana. And that means that no one can borrow that money for personal use. Once it comes into the hands of the tzedakah organization, it can't be used for personal use. So you see that before it comes into the hands of the institution, there's no problem of borrowing that money for yourself. How is that relevant to buying a lottery ticket? So he says, he says, it depends how you buy the lottery. If he says, when a person takes his Meiser money and his objective is that he wants to buy a lottery ticket to win the lottery, his primary objective is not for it to go to the poor, but rather he wants to profit from this money. So what he's trying to do, at least this is his analysis, you're trying to use the Meiser money for personal benefit to basically say, I hope that I profit from this for personal use. I'm taking my tzedakah money. It's already been set aside as tzedakah money, but I want to use it for personal use. And if it doesn't work out for my personal use, eventually it's going to go to tzedakah. Umemela yitzarech lahachzir et hakesef lema'aser. So you're going to end up having to give back that money to tzedakah. Ve'im hu rotza lishtamesh l'tzarech atzmo shelo b'toras halva, as tzarech ladun mishum gezel v'gam b'zeh yitzarech lahachzir es hakesef lema'aser. And if you're not borrowing the money, if we don't view this as a loan that you're taking from your Meiser money, then it may be considered to be stealing from Meiser, and you'd still have to return the money. So either way, if let's say I buy $100 lottery ticket and I end up winning the prize of $10,000, let's just say for example, so I still owe the $100. I've basically put in $100 investment from my Meiser money. I've gotten back $10,000, but I still owe the money back to tzedakah. So I still have to give the $100 back to the charity. Ulam mashamatzoi bizmanenu uvazen adun b'siman zeh. He says, but what's more prevalent in our times is not that a person buys a lottery ticket with the objective of winning the lottery, is that hu shemit kaven gam lemitzvas tzedakah shaharei demei kartis hahagrala holchim l'tzedakah. He says, in other words, in the previous example, I bought, what do they have in Ontario? Do you have a lotto? What do you have? So in Ontario, let's say I set aside $100 that I was going to give for tzedakah. And I say, you know what? I'm going to buy a lottery ticket with the money that I set aside for tzedakah. I'll buy the Ontario lotto. And I'll see if I win. And if I win, I'm going to owe the money back that I set aside for tzedakah. I'm going to have to give it back to tzedakah. But if I lose, I'll still owe that money because I had already previously set it aside for tzedakah. So that's when you buy a lottery ticket that's not attached to a charity. But what we find nowadays is that a charity will run a lottery, and therefore when you purchase the lottery ticket, hu shemitkaven gam lemitzvas tzedakah, shaharei demei kartis hahagrala holchim l'tzedakah. He says, I know that whatever money I use to purchase that lottery is going to go to a charity. Ela shemikivan shuhu rotzeh levatzeh kinyan hakartis bekesef hamaiser v'shetia pras shelo lichor tzarich sheyeh hakesef shelo. He says, but the only thing is the money has to be yours in order for you to be considered to be doing this legitimately. He says, you're giving it already to the charity. Once you relinquish it to the charity, how can you now use that money for personal use? It's as if it came into the hands of the Gabbai Tzedakah. So that's the dilemma, he says, that you're confronting here. If it already comes into the hands of the Gabbai Tzedakah, how can you now win the lottery? It'll turn out retroactively that you've used this money that's come into the hands of the charity for personal use. So in order to sort of justify this, he says, V'hinei hataz kasav shemuter liknos la'achar aliyah l'torah mikasbei meiser. The Taz writes that when you get an aliyah, you're allowed to take your meiser money to pay and give money to the shul for the aliyah that you receive. The lamad zos mimashu matzanu lehedje shetovas hana b'meiser ani muteres. And the Taz derives this from the fact that a person is allowed to get benefit from the tzedakah money in the sense that the prerogative of deciding which charity will get his tzedakah money is his. And the Taz therefore says, if you have an affinity towards a particular charity because that charity honors you, or it gives you non-tangible favors, so then you can choose to give that charity your meiser money. In kain muchach she'efshar lasos kinyan bekesef meiser. He says, and therefore what you see is that you're allowed to exchange services with your meiser money. But that's not really a good proof. He says, "V'yesh litchos shemikivin shahataz diber ba'ofen shakesef olech la'aniyim kimavur betaz atzmo im kan mechira amitis alanostim haliyah l'torah l'misha moser hamaiser shalom." He says, but that's not truly considered an exchange. It's not a quid pro quo. It's not like in exchange for the aliyah you're giving meiser. They're giving you an aliyah, period. And as an appreciation for that, you're giving charity. So you can't necessarily prove it from that kind of situation that in exchange for services or goods, you're allowed to use your meiser money. The Benidon Didan Yeshlomar Shahamosed no, bless you to everybody. He says, and also in our he says in our situation that the charitable organization is notain zchut lahagrala lemisha notain lo tzedaka ve'enza begeder mechira ela begeder matana l'torin. And therefore, you could say the same argument when you're purchasing a lottery ticket from a charitable organization. It's not a quid pro quo. It's not like in exchange for your lottery ticket, we're providing you with goods, but rather, if you win the lottery, we're gifting you. After the fact, we're in an appreciation for your having participated in the lottery. We're gifting you $10,000. And therefore, you're benefiting, and you're allowed to benefit from your meiser money by let's say, getting some kind of service or good as a result of your charitable act, but it's not considered to be stealing from your meiser money, and it's perfectly legitimate. However, he says, Ulam harama kasav zelishano ve'enos in venosnin bitstaka homedes lachalek la'aniyim. The Rama, however, we have to keep in mind. In other words, this whole deliberation is, I'm using charity for personal benefit. I'm using charity money for personal benefit because once I win the lottery, it turns out that retroactively I've benefited from my tzedakah money, from my meiser money, and that's the troublesome sort of aspect over here. So, well, that it seems clear that you have to do, that you have to pay back the charity because you've sort of correct.
So if you bought your ticket for $10, that $10 goes off, and the $10,000 prize money is understood. That's separate from money that he raised.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean,
what we're saying is that
not necessarily. They're basically taking all of the proceeds from the tickets they've sold.
Reducing the proceeds that you're getting. Yes, but if you're the organizer of the lottery, you know you're going to get a $10,000 prize, and you have $100,000. You're going to have $110,000 worth of tickets to make sure you get $100,000.
But it's still coming off profit for the most. That's you're still taking money from that belongs to the institution.
Well, I think the issue that he's dealing with is I'm getting personal benefit from meiser money, from tzedakah money, and ultimately what we're seeing here is that you're allowed to get personal benefit, provided that the charity gets its charity. But then he quotes he says, one way of looking, therefore, at this is that the charity is giving you an independent gift that is completely unrelated, or sort of not unrelated completely, but it's disconnected from the $100 that you gave them. Right, but he says, but it right. He's saying that in order for it to be justifiable. In order for it to be justifiable, he says, that would be one way of looking at it. But then he says, Ulam harama kosav veinosin venostin bitstaka homedes l'chalik la'aniyim. You're not allowed to do business with tzedakah money. In other words, if you're a charitable institution, and this has really interesting ramifications, like for most those that invested in Bernie Madoff, and then they ended up losing huge amounts of money. It's very interesting. The Rama writes that any charity that distributes money to the poor, you cannot take the money that's in chest and you do business with it. Ki im kesef bekesef v'chayotze bo, shema yavo aniyim v'lo yi'eh lahem ma'os l'chalek ad kama shana. Unless there's an immediate exchange of cash. In other words, or an immediate exchange of cash for goods or goods for cash. He says, otherwise, in order to do an investment with that money is not permitted. Why? Because if the poor come along and they need that money and you've collected it, but you don't have the wherewithal to give it to them because you've invested it, it's parked somewhere. So then you are doing a disservice to the poor, which may not apply. Right.
Cash, then it's okay.
Right.
Right. So you put it into a savings account, which you have access to. Hey.
What about what you've done is you take the budget and interest. You actually provide the service that you need.
Yeah. So right, which is what foundations do all the time. Okay. So we will put that aside for now. It would seem that the basis for the Ramah's concern is that this is a type of charity which provides to the poor on a regular basis. By putting aside money from the charity into a long-term investment, you maybe end up depriving the poor. But what you see from this Ramah is Haresha Mutter Lisa Veloses Kesef Bekesef Bekesef Meiser Kishaha Kavana Shaharidachim Yihula Maaser. You basically see from here that as long as there's no danger of depriving the poor, because you're not placing it into a long-term investment where the money will be locked up, you are allowed to, a charitable organization is allowed to do business with Meiser money as long as you're getting an immediate return on the enterprise, even though this money really has been earmarked for the poor. So what do you see from this? Well, barur shahana'a shayechet lemaaser dahavi begeder shliach hamaser. So we see that that every charity has sort of rights to use its charity money as it sees fit. V'chein benidon didan im kana kartis b'maiser v'zacha b'pras, apras shayach lemaaser, dahavi kilo hamaiser atzmo hirviach. And therefore, in this situation, when you buy a lottery ticket and you win, so it's almost like it's the charitable organization's money, and it's like the charity sort of. I guess what he's saying is your Meiser money actually profited by being in the hands of this charitable organization. And therefore, another way of looking at it is that instead of this, your initial $100, which was Meiser money, is now in the possession of the charity and they're giving you a different $10,000. Another way of looking at it is that this $100 of Meiser money was invested and came back as $10,000. So all $10,000 of that money is now considered Meiser money. And that's really what this sort of pivots on. The pivot here, or sort of the equivocation that he's providing, is when you win the lottery, is all of that money now considered your Meiser money and it has to be given to charity, or can you personally benefit from it? So is it right? Is it yours? Because you had set that $100 had been set aside as Meiser money for charity. So now how do we view it when you win the lottery for $10,000? Is it that the charitable institution is giving you a gift independent of your $100? So that money is yours free and clear. That's the first way of looking at it. The second way of looking at it is that they took my charity money, invested it, it came back with a return of 100-fold, and now I got $10,000, but all of that $10,000 is my Meiser money, and therefore I have to use that money for other charities. Let's see. Hapras Shalo, Mikol Malkam Kevin Shekabanosu Liknot Bekesef Shel Hamaiser, Ve'eno Rotsa Shekesef Hamaiser Shel Akinyan Yikanes Lushutol Yidei Kinin Gezel O Yidei Halva, Nimsa Shuhu Masika Kartis Bekesef Shel Maiser Milas Chiati El Maiser. Despite your objective that if you win the lottery, you're going to be able to use that money to put a down payment on a house or whatever, and therefore you want it to be yours. But nonetheless, we also know implicitly that you don't want to cheat or steal from your own Meiser account for personal use. So therefore, V'lamrot shemevuar beramah hanal shemuter ra kesef bekesef v'uliknos bekasbe Meiser aser, afilu im harevachim yu lemeiser. He says, now what does the Ramah say? A charity is allowed to use the money they collect and invest it, but they can only invest it when it's an immediate cash for cash or cash for goods exchange. And that's true even if the profits will go to the charity. Nira dezehu rak im kona kidei lahashkia lematarat revach. Avolim torin lemosad shel tzedakah v'kol hakesef holich letovato, rak sheyesh revach tzedadi sheyachol latzeh mizeh letovas hatzedakah k'mo legabe hagrala, v'zeh mistaver diyoda harama demutar. He says, however, it seems to me, he wants to argue that that's only when the charity or the person investing the charity is doing it to gain more money for the charity. However, when the person investing the money is doing it to gain money for himself, and there's going to be a side benefit to the charity, then perhaps the Rama would agree. In other words, that's the point of equivocation. Al kol panim yitachnu shnei matzavim. O shahapras shayach lekona hakartis mishum shehu begeder matana me'amosa letorim. So therefore, there's two ways of looking at it. Either, like the first way, the charity is giving me a gift as a result of my purchasing a lottery ticket. O shehu shayach lemaiser mishum she'ekein mechira tumuras hamaiser shekibel hamoisad v'hamosad yachol likboy im zeh begeder matana begeder mechir. Or it's considered to be a return on my Meiser investment, and therefore I have this slight dilemma because it may now be considered that I have to use this Meiser money, the return on my Meiser money exclusively for Meiser. But the charitable institution can make that decision how they wish to view it, so that the purchaser of the ticket doesn't end up having a disadvantage. Okay, so I'm going to skip this next tshuva. Basically, they right. It's according to what he's arguing. As long as the Mossad, as long as the institution says this money is not a return on your investment, but is rather a side hustle, all right, a gift, yeah, then it's okay for you to use it for personal use. Yeah, but I think it's implicit. And do you really? I mean, why do these institutions hold lotteries in the first place? Yeah.
But you're still giving it, right? That's the first vote.
But it's so okay. Anyway, I think that the bottom line is that legally it's okay to buy a lottery ticket. You certainly owe the money back to the Meiser, the original $100. So if they give you 10,000 for your 100, you still have to give. I believe you're supposed to give. It could be that you're not obligated to give the initial $100 back to that moisad, but it could be that if you look at it as a gift that they're giving you, and it's completely independent of the $100 that you gave them, so then you wouldn't even have to give them back the $100 from the miser. Now you may want to, from an ethical standpoint, you may say, well, I don't want the moisad to at least to not get my $100 return. We'll have to continue this in Mirza Hashem.